By the time I was 58, I'd been working for over 40 years, and it didn't feel like I had very much to show for it. I had a small house that was almost paid off, a 10-year-old truck, and a few $1,000s in savings, as well as a 401k that looked okay until you worked out how much it would give you on a monthly basis. I wasn't in any kind of debt, so that was okay, and I always paid my bills on time, but every year it just seemed like I was working to keep the lights on. I started out working manual jobs when I was much younger, warehouse work, I did some driving, whatever paid enough for me to get by, and I ended up in some kind of maintenance job at a small factory. The work was reasonable, but it felt like I was not getting anywhere at all. Every time I got a raise, they came so slowly, I barely noticed it, and the cost of everything continued to go up even faster. I didn't live an extravagant life, I hardly ever ate out, and I didn't take many vacations apart from a week here or there every few years. But somehow the balance never seemed to move the way I wanted it to move. Nothing seemed to go according to plan. Most of the guys that I knew were in the same situation as I was, talking about retirement like it was some far off thing that might never happen, and I was starting to think they were right. You'd hear about someone at work dropping dead at 62 or finding out they had an illness right before they planned to stop working, and it made you think, what's the point? Waiting. I didn't have enough to retire comfortably in the States, but if I could find somewhere cheaper to live, maybe I could make my money stretch. That was when I started to look at other places, not with a plan to run away from everything, but to see if I could make what I already had last longer. The Philippines kept coming up, and that's when I started looking at the cost of living in Asia. I didn't know much about the Philippines, apart from the name, and that it was made up of a lot of islands. So I started reading whatever I could, looking online, and thinking about what it was going to be like living there. I wasn't looking for travel pieces or stories about different beaches or where to go for the best vacation. I wanted to know what it was actually going to cost to live at a place like that. You know, things like how much you paid for electric, what you could eat, where you could go out to eat without spending a lot, and how you could stay there for a long time without using a lot of money. Back then, I found out you could get a reasonably okay apartment for around 10,000 pesos a month. You could get smaller places for even less if you didn't mind being outside some of the main areas. The electric bill might have been around 3,000 pesos if you were careful and didn't use the aircon all the time, and you could have meals for under 100 pesos, which were okay. At least, I thought they were okay based on everything I read. I'd never tried them, so I didn't actually know. I compared that to what I was paying at home, and it didn't take long to see why so many people were actually trying the Philippines. I read up on the different visa rules that you needed, and I thought 30 days on arrival and I could extend it, and then you could leave, unless you could get a different visa, such as getting married. I actually thought that that could be an option at some point, getting married and having a proper visa to live there. I looked at flights and finding out where was cheaper to fly from. When could I go to Manila or to Cebu? Lots of things I was trying to understand, and I was using this time as a way to learn about the country without being there. And I thought that I could take a trip first, see if I liked it, and if I did, and it seemed possible, then I could think about what to do from there. Most of what I came across talked about the main places, such as Manila, Cebu, or Davao, but the big places didn't really appeal to me. I'd have enough of working all time and sitting in the traffic lights every half mile, sitting behind the same cars every day. I'd done that before, watching people staring at their phones instead of moving when the lights changed. I didn't want to swap one overcrowded place for another, it felt like it was quite pointless. But Manila looked like it would be worse for that than where I was from. And Cebu, while smaller, still had that built up feel, but I might like it, but I needed to try. I then started reading about different places, Bohol, Camotes, and Bantayan. Bohol looked nice, but I guessed it would have cost more because people had already decided it was worth paying and living there. There was another place called Sikujo, and they had lots of witchcraft stories. Didn't mean much to me at all, but I figured I could actually go and have a look, maybe. Camotes looked quiet, but maybe too much trouble to reach. Lots of things. But one place that kept coming up was Bantayan. It kept coming up as a place that you could get to quite easily from Cebu without flying anywhere else, and it looked cheap once you were there. You had to get a bus to a place called Hagnaya, which was a port, and then the ferry for just under 200 pesos. You could rent a bike for 300 pesos, so you could get around on your own, and you could find rooms for as little as 800 pesos if you weren't picky. These are all the things that I'm learning before going, thinking about, well, if this is the price and this is what people say it doesn't sound like it's very expensive at all. I looked at photos, as you do, and it looked so easy to get around. It didn't look busy and hectic, and it just looked like the type of place that had me written all over it. After a few weeks of going back and forth, I decided to start in Cebu for a week and then head over to Bantayan and see how I felt. I was going to spend a few days in Manila to start with after I arrived in the country, just to see, but I already had a conclusion in my mind that Manila wasn't going to be my place. I didn't just have enough money to move there right there and then, but I could afford to go and have a look, and that's when I decided to actually book the ticket and take the next step. I can remember when I left, it was actually on a Wednesday, because the flight then was cheaper than the other ones when I was going to go on a weekend. It was $900 return to Manila, and there was a layover in Tokyo. That is considerably more expensive today. I'd booked it for a month, so I could get a proper look around, without rushing and thinking that I needed to get back home for work. I didn't want them to start asking questions if I stayed for too much longer. I'd only flown overseas once before, so I wasn't really sure how I'd handle all that time in the air. And by the time I'd landed in Japan, I felt like I'd already had enough. The connection was quite tight, and I thought that I would have just been able to go through, but I had to go through more security checks, the shoes off, belt off, all the usual stuff you need to do. The last leg into Manila was around 4 hours. By the time we landed, it was dark. Immigration took nearly an hour, just standing there in this slow-moving line, watching people ahead of me get stamped through one at a time. I booked into a cheap hotel in Ermita for the first 3 nights, and that was about $35 a night. I thought it was fine until I saw the room. The aircon worked, but it made a really bad noise. The bathroom door didn't close properly, and the bed looked like it had been around for the past 40 years. Didn't sleep much that first night, partly because of the jet lag and partly because of the noises. Horns, shouting, everything going on into the early hours, but it was exciting at the same time. The next day, I just went for a walk around a bit. I started to get hassled, as you did, by all the guys trying to sell me all kinds of things that I had no interest in. But I did end up in a small cafe and just somewhere to sit in the cold air, getting out of the heat of the city. Manila was very busy. It was hot, it was crowded, and while it was interesting for me to see it first time, I knew already it wasn't where I wanted to be. I spent most of my time trying to stay in the shade and looking at ferry and bus schedules for Cebu. The next morning, I went out to see more of Manila, thinking that maybe if I'd saw the right parts or went somewhere else, that maybe it might be okay. But it didn't take me long to realize it wasn't for me. Walking around was really awkward. Some of the sidewalks, or most of the sidewalks in fact, were cracked. Few of them were blocked, so you then had to step into the road with cars and bikes pushing past you. And the air, it smelled bad. It was kind of a mix, food cooking mixed with car exhaust and urine. Every few minutes, someone was trying to sell you something, asking for money, and there was no way to just walk around without being stopped. I suppose it depended where you walked around. I did make it a bit further than where I was into BGC, and that was completely different, but most of Manila was quite different to that. So it was taking quite a lot of getting used to. The traffic was a constant, always horns going off, and the air it felt quite thick and dirty. You could look up into the sky and, I didn't know if it was clouds or smog in the sky, so it was one of those things that you have to see it to believe it. I was always sweating, and it seemed like I needed to change my shirt all the time, but that's something you had to get used to when the heat was like that all over the Philippines. I couldn't picture myself living in Manila. It made no sense. It felt like the sort of place that would take more out of you than it could actually give to you in return. So that afternoon, I booked a ticket to Cebu for the next morning. The difference was quite substantial as soon as I got off the plane. The air seemed to be a lot lighter there, and it seemed there was a kind of slower pace, although it was quite a big city. The hotel I'd booked, it wasn't anything special. $25 a night, but the room was clean and the aircon worked without sounding bad. And I could close the door and have some peace. After Manila, it did feel like I'd made the right move by going to Cebu. I stayed there for 2 nights, mainly to see what things were going to cost when you weren't in Manila. I wasn't really there to do any kind of sightseeing or any of the tourist things. I wanted to know what the day to day would look like in a place like this. On the first morning, I walked into a shop and went straight to the basics section, checking out prices for bread and eggs and coffee and everything that I would use on a daily basis. I looked at the meat section and then I started to compare things to how they were back home. I quickly found that some things were cheaper and some were about the same, but quite a few of the imports were priced so high that, you wouldn't have been able to buy them. I did think that I would have to change my staples if I moved there. I noticed that also, what I thought was strange, most of the people didn't seem to shop like I used to shop. There were no carts full of groceries, but most people seemed to just have a bag in their hand with a few bits inside. I didn't sure why they did that, but perhaps lots of people just went to eat street food, and I sort of found out later on that that's what they did. I stopped at a small cafe for lunch. I remember having pork and rice with a bottle of water, and it worked out at about $1.50. It wasn't an amazing meal, it was just something to sustain you. It wasn't like I was absolutely in love with the food, that's not the case, but I was in love with the price. Later, I managed to find a bakery. You could actually sit in the window with a coffee, watching the street outside, looking at the jeepneys, all the cars, and everyone just being busy getting about. I did really like the feeling, but it did still feel too busy. When I got back to the hotel, I remember asking the front desk about getting out of the city, and they started telling me different bus times and the ferry routes, and they told me how much it would cost to be able to reach the island that I wanted to go to. They said it was easy enough if I didn't really mind to travel, and they wrote some things down on a piece of paper for me. On the third morning, I did decide to take one of the trips, and that was to go to Bantayan. I caught a taxi to the bus station, paid for a seat on an aircon bus to Hangi Airport, and I just settled in for the ride. Pretty bad ride that was. The seat felt like it was made for someone half my size, and after a while my knees were just pressed up into the back of the one in front. The bus stopped off often to pick people up. Also, it seemed like it was a courier service. They were picking up sacks of rice, boxes, and there were even some live chickens in the aisle, but only one and only for a very short amount of time, but I thought it was quite funny. The crossing took around an hour, and luckily it was quite a nice trip. The water was calm, and then you can just look at the amazing beauty around you. Lots of people were just sort of stretching out, sleeping as if it was a place to sleep, and I just stayed on the top deck so I could see the island coming closer. You could see the sand, fishing boats, and it was just an amazing feeling to be going to this place that I'd read about. When we arrived, there was a huge line of tricycles waiting, so I climbed into one of them with my bag wedged between my knees and told the driver to take me to my hotel. It was a very interesting experience. The roads were really narrow, lots of small houses dotted about, and it was like going into a different world. It was more laid back, it was more relaxed, and I started to feel immediately like this was what I envisaged my retirement to be. Perhaps this would be my paradise in the Philippines. I found that the streets were quite quiet. Motorbikes were going by, and there were dogs everywhere. People selling things all the time. I stopped at a small place near the market, and I saw a woman behind the counter and decided to go in there to have something to eat. When I walked in, she just looked up and looked straight at me, and asked me what I wanted before I even sat down. I was quite shocked about how beautiful she was. I hadn't come to the Philippines to chase women, although I knew it was possible and plenty of foreigners did it. But that was something I thought about for when I finally moved there, not right now. This was just meant to be a trip to see if I could make it work. But still, there was something about her that made me want to hang around a bit longer. She asked all the usual questions, where I was from, how long I was staying, and if I'd been to the island before. I told her I'd only just arrived and didn't know anything about the place. She said there were nice beaches, a market, of course, because we were right next to it, and she just advised places to go for something to eat. She was quite busy taking orders. I think I'd just got there at a particular time when it was busy. And I don't know what I liked about her, but I just started to feel like perhaps she would be something more. I'm thinking about this after I've only asked and taken an order. I got myself a cold drink and then I just sat there, thinking about what to do next. But I stayed longer. She always kept coming over and giving me more ice in the glass and asked if I liked the island so far. She was almost making small comments, and I didn't know if she was just being polite and courteous, or if she saw me as a foreigner and she was interested in me. I was starting to get all these pictures and all these ideas in my mind without even knowing what was going on. The problem was, now she was part of my vacation, and I wanted to get to know her more, yet telling myself I should just leave it and think about something like that later. The next morning, even, I told myself I should go out and explore the island. I should be getting a feel for the place, finding out if this would be somewhere I would want to live. I didn't have all the time in the world, so there was no reason for me to go back and sit in that small cafe. But by mid morning, I was already in the cafe. I tried to pretend it was because I wanted another drink, somewhere to sit, but I think I knew that it wasn't. When I got there, she was behind the counter as she was the day before, and when she saw me, she did smile, just like she was expecting me. Before I'd even sat down, she asked if I wanted the same drink. I told her I did, and she just brought it over. Then I just wanted to see where things went. It was pretty interesting having a conversation with her. I didn't tell her that I'd wasted half the morning deciding if I should go there or not. I just thought, let's have a conversation. Luckily, it was quiet when I walked in and there were no other customers, and she was just wiping down the counter. She brought me over the drink and then she sat down and we talked for a while. She asked all kinds of questions for me, and then I started to ask her questions as well. And then she started talking about her family. And I'm thinking, is this the famous Philippines experience that many guys come for? Or is it just something else a little more innocent? I didn't know, but I was enjoying it, and that's what it was about. After I left the cafe, I decided to walk further that day. I hadn't been that far before. I'd spent too much time in the cafe. But I did stay on the main road, past a few small shops, and then I went towards the beach. I saw fishing boats that were pulled up, and there was a man sitting in the shade, fixing something on one of them. So I actually went and had a bit of a conversation with him. It was really interesting seeing how different people lived, and I was starting to picture what it would be like if I was living there. Waking up and actually walking to the beach for a look and actually enjoying myself for a change. It was starting to excite. By then, the heat had worn me down. It was so hot. So I went back to my room and just relaxed for a while. I thought that evening I would do something different. What I was going to do, I didn't know. But when the sun started to drop, I found myself heading back towards the market again. Again, there she was, wiping down a table, and she was putting chairs back in place. I needed to picture this place not as a fancy restaurant. It was more of a very basic place. The floor was a little bit dirty. There was trash piled up in different places. So it wasn't this picturesque place. But I didn't mind. Again, when she saw me, she smiled. And then she asked what I was doing that night. I didn't have any plans. And then she said, well, why don't you wait until I finish and should take me somewhere? Couldn't believe it when she asked that, but I wasn't about to say no. We walked to a bar that was near the sea. It was only a small place, and there were a handful of tables outside, and music blaring from the inside. We sat down, had a couple of drinks, and just talked, this time about where I was from and how long I was staying, what I'd seen so far, and what my intention was, how it was to move there. At some point, she told me she was 27, which was a lot younger than me, and she had a son who lived with her mother on another part of the island. She didn't talk much about it, so we just carried on drinking and talking, and it was, fun. We left the bar and walked back towards the market. The road was quite quiet. Only the odd motorbike went past, and there were a few people sitting outside their houses, talking. Sometimes they would greet you and say hi. I found the people so friendly, and that's one thing that added to the experience. The people were just so nice. She told me that she had the next day off and asked if I wanted to meet her that day. I told her yes almost immediately, and we agreed on what time without much more talk. When we got to the market, she went her own way and I carried on back to my hotel. I kept thinking about her being 27 and having a kid. I didn't ask anything more, not how old he was or how much she saw him. It wasn't the time for that. I felt like I didn't even know what was going to come of this potential relationship, but I was starting to feel like I wanted it more than anything. Nothing changed my mind about seeing her again, even thinking about the age and her kid and everything else. By the time I got back to my room, I sort of knew that tomorrow was going to be a good day and I couldn't wait. We met the next day like we said we were going to, and we spent most of it just looking around. She told me all about where she was from and her family, and how her father went fishing when the weather was good, and her mother looked after her son, and she helped provide for them. Then she started talking about land she had on another part of the island. She said it had been in the family for a long time, and some of it was close to the beach. It was a bit further inland as well, but she did say she hoped one day she could build something there. Maybe a bigger house or a place to rent. A tourist place for rent, like a resort. That was her dream, and I piqued my interest when I heard her say that. We ate at a small place that was close to the sea and stayed there until it got dark. I thought that would be it for the night, and we walked back. She actually came to my room. I really wasn't expecting that. Of course, I'd never been to the Philippines before, and I knew how things happened there, but it never crossed my mind that that would happen to me. Not so soon. In the morning, I woke up and just lay there, thinking, how had I got here? She left work, and I went to see her later. Again, I couldn't help myself. Just sitting, talking to her when she was not working. After that, we were together every single day. Either I was waiting for her to finish work, or I was spending the day together if she had a day off. I stopped thinking about anything else. Now, instead of me concentrating on the fact that I'm here to see if I can live here in retirement, I'm now spending all my time together with her. That meant the days felt like they went faster than I wanted them to, and when the last one came around, I felt sick knowing I had to leave. We had lunch and she came with me to the ferry. I kept looking at her and trying to picture myself actually living here. Would it work? How long would it be before I was to see her again? All these things I was thinking about, and then I left. And on the boat, I was already thinking about what it was going to take to move there for good. Then I started thinking I could sell my house. I thought about her idea for a small resort, and I thought that I could put money into it and be a part of it. By the time the island was a small strip on the horizon, I was convincing myself that it was all possible. The ferry ride back to Cebu, it felt longer than the one when I came to the island, because it was a different feeling. One was excitement, wanting to be there. One was wishing I was still there. I messaged her and she replied straight away. By the time I got to Manila, we were already talking about me coming back. This time not just to visit, but to stay. She talked about the family land again, how there was room to put a few rooms on it. Maybe a place where people could eat so they didn't have to go into the town. She said more tourists were going every year. I told her I'd think about it, but I kind of already made my mind up. The flight back to America felt like I was going the wrong way. When I got back, it was like everything I'd left behind was worse than I remembered. That's something I never expected. Everything was the same houses, everything, people doing the same things. I'd seen it for years and nothing was different, and it seemed dull now. It wasn't good enough anymore. I really didn't want to be there. I didn't see the point in hanging out there any longer, so I'd had enough. It needed something different in my life, and I thought I'm going to sell my house. It would give me enough money to make the move. I called an agent, put it on the market, and while it was up for sale, I spoke to her every day. We'd talk about the land all the time, and then I was talking about how I was excited to do something and I would probably do it with her. It was exciting to think we could make money, and also without having to work for anyone else. In that part of the world, it would have been a dream come true. That was it then. It sold. My house. I was going to go all in on the Philippines. I just thought, I'm going to go back, and that's it. So I did. She was there waiting for me when I finally got to Cebu. I'd flown into Manila and had a connecting flight straight away. I was tired when I got there, but as soon as I saw her, I felt a lot better. We didn't spend any time in Cebu City. We went straight up to the port and then straight across to the island. Because I'd been before as a tourist, I knew sort of what it was like, but this time it felt different because here I was going to a place that was meant to be my future. It was exciting. It was really exciting, but most of all, I was in love with this girl. She was there with me, and this was going to be the highlight of my life. When we got to the ferry port, her brother was there with a trike. Never seen him before. And after the crossing, we went straight to her parents' house, who again I'd never seen them. They were just sat out on plastic chairs, and they had some for me, and they'd cooked fish and rice, and I was offered it. I could tell that I was welcome. At least I felt I was, because they kept telling me that it was nice to meet me, and how much their daughter talked about me, and how much they thought we could be a good couple. It was amazing. So I was happy the fact that I was there. Everyone was polite. No one came on as being after money or looking for anything from me. Just seemed like it was a genuine setup. I thought it was. So I'll tell you what happened next. Then she started talking about the piece of land, a short walk from the house, and she wanted to put something there on it. Maybe a few rooms for guests, small bar. Nothing too big, but enough to bring in a good income. That would give us a place to live as well without having to pay rent. And I could picture it. She spoke of it so well, the way she described it made it sound simple and manageable. And I told her it was worth looking at. I wasn't thinking exactly about anything at the moment, but I was sort of convinced that I would just get a lease, or perhaps it would be for her, and we could get married. That's what I was thinking about. The next morning, we walked down a track to see the land. It wasn't huge, but there was space for what she wanted to do, and you could hear the sea close by. She told me that her father had said it would be fine for us to build there, and we could work out the details later. That sounded reasonable to me, because I was thinking in terms of getting started. I wasn't thinking about legal documents, and then we talked about marriage again. It was an offhand way, though, but said that we could get married. It would make things easier for me in the Philippines. I didn't say that I was going to get married straight away, but I did plan to, because I wanted that permanent visa that I would have got if I was married. I thought having that would give me a bigger feeling, a bigger enjoyment of the Philippines, if you will. So we thought we could do things slowly. Do things slowly. Don't rush. But within a week, I'd already started. We had rushed. Started buying materials straight away. Most of it was arranged by her family because they said they knew who to talk to for the best prices, and I went along with that because I didn't want to come across like I didn't trust them. Every time something was delivered, she would tell me how much, and how much we'd saved compared to going through a shop. I didn't have a way to check if it was true or not, but I let it pass because at that stage, I still thought we were working towards the same goal. The money started going out faster. I didn't want it to go out that fast, but it never seemed like it was huge amounts at once. I just had to convince myself it was fine. It was just part of the process of getting the place ready. And whenever I thought about slowing down, she would just say, if we kept going, we could open in a few months. And that kept me pushing on. It kept me continuing putting money into it because I envisaged what it would be like. We had her cousin doing a lot of the building work, and he seemed good at doing it. And also, apparently, it was cheaper than employing someone else. He did work at his own pace. Some days he'd never showed up, and then I'd go and check, and he wasn't there, and it would be the same as it was the last time I went to check. And there was always some kind of reason he came up with. Always. But I had to just kind of ignore it because I didn't want to be making a scene as a foreigner. Looking back, I do think it was one of the biggest mistakes I made, just trusting people blindly, because if you don't push people, then you can't do anything about it, and this guy's not working properly. Yet, it is coming together slowly. The bar was the next idea we were going to build. She said it would make sense if we got that ready, which that mean we could start bringing in more money before the rooms were even finished. I actually agreed because it sounded like a next logical step. It did mean more expenses. We would need to buy, fridges and glasses and tables and lots of things that we never talked about before. Better lighting, etc. Lots of things. And every time I thought we had everything, there was always another list of things we needed. But I did keep telling myself it would pay off, and once we were open, I wouldn't have to watch the balance in my account drop every week. But it was always dropping faster than I wanted it to. And I started moving money from the US even more, just to keep things going. I should have stopped and thought harder about what I was doing, but I really felt committed, and I didn't want to admit to myself that I'd made a mistake or that I'd underestimated what things would take. The idea of walking away without finishing, though, that seemed worse than the thought of spending more, so I just kept going. and I still didn't bring up any of the ideas to do with leases or paperwork because it was her family's land, and in my mind, that meant I was safe. The subject of marriage kept coming up, but in a light way, I always was saying, well, we'll do that eventually, as if to say, let's get this out of the way first. When the bar did finally open, we had a very small crowd of people in occasionally. Mostly it was locals, which meant we were charging local prices and didn't make a lot of money. But occasionally a few foreigners came in, and that was okay. I thought maybe that it would work after all. It was never enough to make a real profit. Once we covered the costs of everything and everything that we needed to pay for, there was always more money going out than coming in, and repairs that needed making. And every time she said we needed to pay for something, I just had to agree and pay for it without understanding what it was actually for. I started to feel like no matter how much I spent, it was never going to reach the point where it could just run on its own, and my account balance was now less than half of what it was when I arrived. That was the point I started to think that perhaps I needed to protect what I'd already got. By then, it was already too late. Because one afternoon, her parents called us over and sat us down and told me we needed to talk about the land. I remember thinking it was odd to talk about it now when everything was already there. And then her mother said something about needing a 5 year lease paid up front, or they'd have to consider other options. And it took me a few seconds to realize that she was serious. I sat there, not sure if I heard her right, because up until that point, there'd never been any single mention of me paying a lease. Not when we walked over the first time I looked at it, and not when I started to pay for things, never. Not when we were putting the walls up, not when we opened the bar. And now, with everything in place, they were telling me that I had to pay for 5 years up front if I wanted to keep using it. And I didn't know if I was meant as a warning or some kind of ultimatum, but the number they mentioned was so high it knocked the air out of me, and I was just there looking at them while she kept her head down, not saying much. And I realized this wasn't something they had decided there and then. This was something that they talked about and agreed on a long time ago, and now presenting this to me like this because I'd already spent money. Then I started to understand more that I'd built something on land that wasn't mine, or that it wasn't leased by me, with no paper to say I had the right to keep it. And then I couldn't even walk away and get anything back from it. I could either pay or walk away. And that was it. If I walked away, I lost everything I'd put in, and if I paid, I'd be putting in even more with no guarantee that they wouldn't come back later asking for more. And that sick feeling in my stomach told me that was exactly what would happen. When we left her parents' house, we didn't talk much on the walk back. And that night, I just lay there, just thinking about every decision I'd made, thinking, why have I done what I did? Selling my house was one thing, then not getting a lease on the land, telling myself it would all work out if I just kept going. And it was like looking at a list of mistakes with my name right at the top. But yet still a part of me wanted to believe I could fix it if I just came up with the money somehow. The thought of leaving and admitting I'd blown through most of what I had on something that was never really mine, it was worse than staying. But when I looked at what I had left, it was nowhere near enough to cover 5 years up front and still have anything to live on. And that was when I started to see it for what it was. It wasn't an understanding or bad timing, but it was a way of either getting more money out of me or using what I'd built for their own benefit. I hated it was her family that did that. I hated that she wasn't standing up for me. And the next few weeks were just me trying to hold on, covering expenses at the bar, watching the little money come in, yet most of it go away in bills. More of it than most of it went in bills, and I was still going out of pocket every month and every day that I was there. Then the end came quicker than I thought, because one morning a father came by and he just told me they decided it was better for them to use the lands instead. There wasn't anything to say, because I had no paper or claim, nothing except a building full of things that I'd paid for. And I spent the few days selling what I could to anyone who'd take it, things like chairs and tables and fridges, even bottles from the bar. All for a fraction of what I'd paid for them, and I just wanted to get some cash together to leave. She didn't stop me, and that was the thing that hurt the most. I thought I was going to be marrying her. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with her. I was in love with her, yet she was on her family's side. She just said it was better that way, because I wouldn't have to worry about the stress of running a business. I couldn't believe she'd said that, as if all that money I'd put in was just hers. I didn't bother arguing because I knew it was pointless. She'd cheated me, her family had cheated me, and I had realized I was just another person who went to the Philippines and failed. A week later, I was on a ferry with a bag. It weighed less than the one I brought with me. I was heading back to Cebu with no plan except to get a flight out before I spent the last of what I had. By the time I landed in Manila, I'd already decided to go back to the States and work because there wasn't anything else I could do. A month later, I was back in a small rented apartment. Going from being a homeowner to having nothing was when it hit the hardest. I'd followed a dream and I'd placed trust in a girl I loved, and I got nothing in return, apart from failure and heartache.